We're going to go ahead and get started. I would like to welcome Mr. Rich Riebling to the lectern to give us an overview of the proposed budget. Welcome, Rich.
Good afternoon. Am I on? Yeah. Good afternoon, members of the council, Vice Mayor. Appreciate this opportunity. Chairman Matthews, look forward to working with you and your committee over the next several months as we conclude what I think will be another outstanding budget for the metropolitan government. Before I get into slides, I want to, in addition to thanking all of you for being here, members of the council and department representatives, I want to give a shout out to the members of the finance staff, my finance staff that are here this afternoon, who really have made this all possible with their hard work. And members of the finance staff, stand up. Let everybody see who you are. We appreciate all your work. Thank you. That, of course, includes our fearless leaders, Gene Nolan and Talia Lomax O'Neill, this is the first year that Talia is not hidden behind the podium, the column back there. I appreciate her being out front. Before I get into it, let me just say a couple big observations about sort of the state of the city and kind of where we are from a financial condition. And let me say that I would use the word we are in a very strong financial position. I'm very pleased to report that the city is in a good position. We've come through the flood, the recession. We've made tough decisions. And because of that today, we're stronger financially than we were several years ago. We maintained our outstanding bond rating. We've built our reserves. Revenues are now moving towards the growth side rather than the decline side like we saw a few years ago. Unlike many cities in the country, our property values are appreciating. And so what I'm proud to present to you today, to members of the council, is what I consider a really solid budget for Nashville, and one in which we're going to continue to focus on our priorities. We're going to be able to return some funds to departments in critical areas that need some additional funding, that have taken some appreciable reductions over the past several years. In other words, in my opinion, we're going to keep Nashville moving forward. The budget itself is a $1.8 million budget, and I believe the copy of this, has been distributed to everyone, which is about a 5.86% increase over fiscal year 13. And as no secret here, Mayor kind of said it early on, no tax increase. And actually, as you'll see in a minute, the actual tax rate is going to decline a little bit because of the reappraisal and property value growth. Just a slide to sort of show sort of the history over the last, since 2009, sort of where we are on our budgets. Many of you who are in the prior council remember being here during a really bad, tough period when the economy was such, and we actually saw declines in our budget for several fiscal years. Then we started seeing some recovery in 12. Obviously in 2013, the council supported the tax increase that produced about $100 million of new revenue for the city. And now in fiscal 14, what we're proposing is a budget with about another $100 million. But over that period of time, about a 15% growth in our budget, or about a 2.5% per year growth, which I think is very conservative, yet funding our needs. Where does the money come from? As always, property tax is the biggest collection of our revenue. Local option sales tax is up a little bit this year. And as you will see shortly, we are recommending the use of some fund balance, which would represent about 2% of the budget. Here's the revenue growth for this year. We have about $55 million of new revenue to fund this budget. Property taxes are growing about 1.5% over last year. Sales tax, about $24 million, which would be about a 6% growth we're factoring in for next year. And then finally, all other, the biggest all other would be in the state basic education formula funding, and we have budgeted a $10 million increase in state revenues for education this year. Sort of kind of looking at the history of our property tax collections, as you see, we've seen, other than 1 year, a slow, a little bit of growth, not a lot, other than 2013, which was the tax year. And then this year, we're projecting about a $16 million growth. Reappraisal, obviously, Mr. Rooker came to you earlier this year and sort of gave you the details of the reappraisal. The legislation we filed today will set a certified tax rate of $4.52, which would be a 14-cent decline in the rate from the current $4.66. I believe it's 11 cents in the GSD and 3 cents in the USD. Now, all of this is subject to a lot of more review by the state. And so I would say that there might well be some modest adjustments in this number following our discussions with the state. But we believe that's approximately where the rate would be, and that's what we're comfortable, and what us showing is what the revenues will generate. As you remember, in a reappraisal, you can't generate any new revenue. It's got to be a wash. And so that rate would generate the same amount of tax dollars that we collected this year minus new growth, stuff that wasn't on the tax rolls in prior years. Sales tax, a good story on sales tax. From the declines year over year that we saw in 2010, slight increase in 11. What you're seeing, we budgeted for 2013, the current year, about $294 million, $295 million. In fact, our collections will exceed $300 million this year. We're seeing sales tax growth this year probably close to 8%, and we've budgeted a 6% growth for the next fiscal year. If you believe sales tax is indicative of the local economy, which obviously I think it is a major factor, we're seeing some good growth and clearly a wonderful turnaround from what we saw in 2010-11 when we were seeing declines in sales tax. As I said earlier, we are recommending the use of some fund balance. As we talked about in last year's budget, when this council, under the leadership of then Chairman McGuire, actually set aside some additional funds for debt service, we're going to need to use some fund balance this year in order to meet our budget, both in our growth in just general operating needs as well as our debt service needs. As you can see on this slide, the various amounts that we're going to recommend being appropriated from each of the funds. But I think, as importantly, you'll see on the far right, we are going to maintain some strong fund balance in all areas. Again, we knew this day was coming when we did the debt restructuring back in 2010. We knew there was going to be a day. We wanted to restructure our debt in 2010 to lower our costs for that period of time while we were in the middle of the bad economy, had a flood. And we knew that we were going to have some increases in debt. We were prepared for it, and fortunately our reserves are in a strong enough position that we can fund that debt service requirement and continue to have fund reserves higher than what our policies call for. Using fund balance is not an anomaly. It's been done throughout this government almost every year. This is just, we picked a few representative years to show fund balance. In 2004, $100 million was appropriated from the fund balance. This year, the total is about $44.8 million. Over the past 10 years, the fund balance appropriations have averaged around $31 million. So it's slightly larger this year. But again, as I said earlier, we knew that. We knew it was going to be larger this year because of the increase in debt. What that means is at the end of this fiscal year, current year, fiscal 2013, we're projecting a large growth in fund balance because we're going to be able to actually save money this year. Revenues are higher than we anticipated. So the projections are at the close of this current fiscal year that we'd have about $137 million in our operating fund balances. And with the appropriation that we recommended, we think at the end of 14 we'll still be at $110 million, which, as you can see from a historical perspective, is still on the high end of where we've been over the last several years. So still in what I consider a fiscally strong place as it relates to our fund balance. Where the money goes, the big change here from year over year is in debt service. Last year, this number was about 8% of the budget was on debt service. This year, it's going to jump to 11%. The other is slight decline in about 1% decline in education, general government, and infrastructure. Again, that's just in percent of the budget, not in actual dollars, but just in its percentage of the budget that goes for those purposes, and that's really because of the increase of debt service cost. And this lays out where the money goes. $100 million growth, as I said earlier. Debt service is about $57 million of it. Schools, we recommended a $26 million improvement in schools. Employee and retiree costs run about $10 million. And then general government is really a net of about $7 million. That's really the net change after some improvements and reductions. We continued, as you'll see in a minute, we've continued to reduce areas of government, and there are some savings in this budget in order to net out a $100 million growth. Debt service, obviously, a very important issue based on the number we're going to fund this year. As you see the growth, next year we have a growth of obviously much less than this year, about $19 million. And then that's the peak. At that point, it peaks out and actually starts declining a little bit or staying flat for several years until 2020, and when it starts declining. With the recent bond sale the council authorized, we sold bonds 2 weeks ago. We'll actually close on that transaction next week. Between our commercial paper and money that we sold, we won't have to incur additional debt probably until 2017 or 18. And I might add, by that time, because of our fairly heavy principal repayment schedule, we will pay off some $450 to $500 million of outstanding bonds before we would be in position to issue any new debt. Schools, as we stated earlier, a $26 million increase, which is a $3.6 million increase over fiscal 13. Obviously has gotten a lot of attention already in the media and other places. Does not fund schools to the requested amount adopted by the school board a few weeks ago, but we believe provides a strong increase for schools. As you can see, over the last 6 years, we've seen a increase of more than 20% in school funding. To the $746 million number. Just for comparison purposes, while schools have grown 20% over that period, the general government's grown about 10%. So as we've stated earlier, our priority has been schools, and schools has been getting the bulk of our revenue that we could afford. This year, we think we've provided a good increase for schools, but clearly it's not possible to fund them at the level that they are asking for without making a lot of sacrifices in the rest of the government. Sacrifices which I think we've made over the past several years already. As I said, we have to balance the needs of schools with the rest of the government. And as we've discussed with the schools, I think their task is to identify efficiencies, areas they can save money without affecting the classroom. That general government's done that over the past several years, and our charge to schools is to do the same. It's a $26 million increase. Obviously, our other area of growth that takes up a lot of our budget are employee cost. Our benefits and health care cost will increase about $6.4 million this year. Our pension contribution increases from 15.9 to a little over 17.1%, and we've assumed a cost of health care benefits of about 5%. As you might recall, our health care plan is on a calendar year rather than a fiscal year, so that increase would take effect in January of this year. One of the major areas of continued concern to us and growth in the budget is the IOD medical cost. As you see from this slide, it's continued to rise fairly rapidly over the past several years. One of the actions that we will be filing with this budget is the council approval of the opening of, we would call an IOD clinic, an injury on duty clinic. We will be proposing to lease space that previously was leased by General Hospital. We're going to contract with an occupational health care provider, an expert in the field of injuries on duty, we think will both lower the cost and provide better service for the employee. Several departments of the government have already used this service and have had great results. And we think it's potentially will save at least $1 million a year while providing, we think, better service for employees who get injured. The details of all that will be forthcoming in legislation of the council as part of this budget, but we think it is a critical step in sort of holding the line on some of these injury on duty medical costs going forward. The retirement incentive, just some highlights on that to make sure we're all on the same page. 365 of the general government, police and fire, took the incentive. Hospital authority ended up with a very large percentage of its employees taking it, some 118. The cost, about $12 million. All of the departments that had employees that took the buyout have prepared a detailed plan that the finance department has approved so that the whole cost will be recovered, if not already in this fiscal year, by the conclusion of fiscal year 2014. Pay recommendations. What we've proposed in this budget is a 1.5% across the board increase for all full and part-time employees effective January 1st. We will be recommending, once again, that increments not be funded. As I've stood up here and said now for the 4th year in a row, probably, maybe 5th year, it's just impossible to continue to fund the increments with the kind of increases that we're seeing in our budget. I think one of the principal steps that we're taking forward this year is we have money in the budget to start to hire a consultant for the first compensation study for Metro employees that's been done probably in, well, it's at least it's probably 8 years or longer since there's been a comprehensive pay plan study. And we think it's time to do one, and money is in the budget, is recommended in the budget for that purpose. In some, our investment in employees this year, some $10 million growth in the budget based on our employee cost spread out across the entire government. Turning to good news for some departments, I guess they may look at it. We are recommending that several departments receive some additional funding this year. Just briefly highlighted, Arts Commission, some money to host the annual, a major conference that's coming to Nashville this year. Funds needed to host that conference. The assessor needs some hearing officers to handle appeals based on the 2013 reappraisal. The county clerk has got additional functions with the state closing some offices, and we've proposed some increases for her office. District attorney, some money for salary equalization between its state and local DAs. ECC, is an Emergency Communication Center, is sort of an agency that is taking on more responsibility. They're at fairly low staffing patterns and need some additional staffing. Fire, some improvements for overtime, special events overtime, uniforms, telecommunications. Health Department, we are recommending as part of this budget 3 new employees for animal control at the Health Department, which would be funded by recommended fee increases, which would accompany the budget. Library, recommendation of nearly $500,000 in funds, which would allow the opening of the main library on Mondays. It's been closed for probably 3 or 4 years. Parks, obviously we all know we've added to the inventory at parks tremendously. They are being stressed in terms of the maintenance. So it's funds to increase grass mowing, as well as the opening of 2 important facilities, some during the fiscal year in Sevier Park and Paradise Ridge. Planning Commission funds to continue the general plan update. Police, the largest increase, obviously other than schools, $2.8 million. This fully funds the Madison precinct for the full year, staffing for the crime lab, as well as additional funds for some special events, which they're increasingly being called to serve the public. Public Defender, Dawn Diener, has done a wonderful job in lobbying the state of Tennessee for some additional money. She is going to get additional appropriation through the state budget of some $512,000, which will all go into her budget for improvements to the Public Defender's office. Public Works is a big number, but it unfortunately doesn't provide much other than most of it's going to a rate increase for street lighting for the NES, as well as some contractual increases. We'll fund the horticultural crew that they had for part of last year for the full year, and a much requested bike ped coordinator, which is a growing area of interest for the city. The Sheriff's Office is a increase of a little over $1 million, primarily for some additional staff and some contractual increases. At the Sheriff's request, we had a staffing study done to ascertain the need for some additional staffing in the jail. It came back with the need for staffing levels to be increased, and this gets us in that direction with, I believe it's either 14 or 16 additional staff for the Sheriff's Office. General Services, large increase, mostly due to fleet improvements, just normal contractual increases, and new building inventory. This year they'll have the Madison, all the Madison complex will be in their budget, as well as the taking over of the maintenance of some fire halls, thus the need for improvement there. IT is mostly licensing increases for software. There are some increases in security vulnerability, trying to improve our security features in our system. And finally, an expansion of our public wireless system into some park facilities and other places. I know Mr. Durbin will go into more detail of that at his budget presentation, but obviously there's a growing request for public wireless, and we think it's time to get Metro moving more in that area. Even with all of the improvements, we continue to do, as we have every year, look for ways and areas in the budget that we can cut spending. Spending in the departments is about $11 million. We've taken out of various funds and subsidized accounts this year, which would bring our total to probably close to $70 million that we've reduced over the last 6 years from various budgets. Turning to some of the special enterprise funds, we are not recommending in the budget any subsidy for farmers market, auditorium, or state fair. Auditorium has what we believe sufficient fund balance to get through this fiscal year. Farmers market, I guess something that was started last year with the council. I think there's a need to keep some focus on these areas. And so by not providing the funds, I think it forces them to be more creative, to take their job more serious. Farmers Market has had, the board itself has had 4 meetings in the last month. The board is focused on finding a way to get to financial break even over a couple-year period. Again, I'm not saying that we wouldn't come back with some supplemental appropriations in the fiscal year for them, but I think that, as demonstrated last year, it's better to keep the pressure on these agencies this year rather than to give them a money number which then they would try to operate to. And so I think that's true for Farmers Market Auditorium. State Fair has less of a fund balance than it did last year, and again, we would charge them to do what's necessary to get closer to break even over the course of the next year. 2 other agencies I want to talk about: Hospital Authority and then ultimately MTA. We are proposing a reduction in the hospital authority subsidy somewhat. It's about a $4 million reduction. And I would remind you that last year when we set the hospital subsidy, some $7.5 million of that subsidy number was taken away from them to repay some debt from prior years, to repay an obligation they had to the city. So they actually operated on a number that was $7.5 million less than the subsidy number, the $42 million number that they had. So we think this is a number that they can work on. They came back with a supplement this year, really primarily because of the employee buyout incentive program, required them to get some additional funding this year. We think they can live on that subsidy. As you know, there's a lot of change going on in that facilities. We are looking at opportunities for Bordeaux to see if there's potential buyer or operator who would like to take Bordeaux and operate it and relieve the city of that operation. And there's continued dialogue between General Hospital, Meharry, and others in the community about the future of General Hospital and what we need to do to make that facility even stronger going forward. And so we think that subsidy is one that the hospital authority can live on, especially in light of what we think will be some savings with Bordeaux sometime during this fiscal year. Transit Authority is an improvement of $4 million. Not what they asked for, I might add, but one that we think is justified to maintain the current level of service. Last year we funded for a portion of the year the University Connector and the Murfreesboro Road BRT. Both are successful, I think, ventures, and we didn't fund them for the full year because it was going to take them well into the fiscal year to get operational. They now need the funding for the full fiscal year to continue that service, as well as just normal increases of labor, fuel, materials, things of that nature. We think a $4 million number will allow them to operate at the current level of service for the fiscal year. There are a couple of small new initiatives that I want to mention, so you'll see them in the budget. One is for the last several years, we've been funding nonprofits through this Community Enhancement Fund program, and we've kept that level of funding fairly flat and the areas of interest the same. This year, we think because of just the overall need for literacy in this community, adult literacy, that we are recommending an increase in the Community Enhancement Fund to fund a new category of nonprofits in the area of adult literacy. We also are recommending what we're calling the Office of Innovation for Metro Government, which is a new concept that communities are doing across the country. I think we're at the forefront of that are looking for new ways and new ideas for the delivery of service, ways to both improve the delivery of service and also the contact with the public, make the public more aware of how their government provides services. And we've hired 2 people for this office. One of your former colleagues, Christine Lalonde, who's taking a leave from Belmont, and Yahweh Ye, who has just moved here from California. He's actually, interestingly, is the outgoing mayor, just left being mayor of Palo Alto, California. And he's moving here with his family. He's an audit background, really knowledgeable local government. Between the 2 of them, I envision some really creative ideas on how we can make government streamlined and more efficient going forward. And then finally, we've put $1 million in the budget for Councilman Tiger and Councilman Maynard-led initiative for a small business incentive program. That legislation, you might recall, was on first reading at the last meeting, I believe, and is designed to track the budget going forward. Looking ahead to the future, what are our needs? Debt service, as I told you earlier, we got another $19–20 million increase in debt service next year. We also have some major new facilities coming online in fiscal 15. The Bellevue Library, the new Lentz Health Center, which is under construction, the Midtown Hills Precinct, and the Southeast Davidson County Community Center Library, all of which will be completed sometime by the end of the next fiscal year into the first quarter of the 2015 budget. So obviously, we will continue, we will fund those once they're open, and we will, as we said earlier, continue to fund and look for ways to find operational savings. Just housekeeping legislation, these are all the various pieces that are accompany the budget, the operating budget, tax levy ordinance, certified tax rate, which is a little different this year. That's a reappraisal document, which you have to certify the new tax rate based on the reappraisal. The Urban Council resolution, pay plan resolutions, an extension of the agreement with the the memo of agreement with the Agricultural Extension Service. I talked about the animal control fees, the injury on duty clinic, the Red River contract is allowed, which is the garbage collection contract. An extension of that contract will allow us to lower rates, which we're taking those savings already in the Public Works budget, so we would ask the council to approve that contract, and then obviously the small business incentive program. Quickly turning to the capital spending plan, we're looking at filing later, sometime in the next week or so, a $300 million capital spending plan for fiscal year 14. Sort of kind of broad highlights. Again, the detailed plan will be released here in the next several days. Some money for fire, for some additional, continue the growth, the renovation of fire halls. General services is maintenance. We think one of the exciting projects there will be a one-stop shop for permitting and codes, which was going to be renovating some space in the Metro office building for that purpose, as well as some maintenance of buildings, continued needs in IT, transit authority, a $27 million increase, and which would include funding for the design phase of the AMP program, the BR East-West connector. That money wouldn't be spent until we got accepted into received acceptance from the feds, but we wanted to go ahead and put it in the spending plan. Parks, greenways, maintenance, additional development on the riverfront, public works, a large number, sidewalks, roads, bridges, streets, signalization, public library, some money for the first time, some ongoing maintenance money for the libraries. One of their big concerns that I talked to them about is that they don't really have any funds to just do deferred maintenance on their facilities. They'll develop a master list to work from, and this is carpeting, air conditioning systems, just the guts of the libraries. Some of the branches are now many years old and need some refurbishing, and so for the first time, we think there's a need to put some money in there for libraries for that purpose. Schools, $95 million. That ranges from renovations, maintenance projects, new buses. It would be funds to open the Waverly Belmont Elementary School, I think a new elementary school at Tusculum, a new Southeast Elementary School, and Councilman Garrett's not here, but our other councilman from Goodlettsville, Councilman Pardue, close to Councilman Pridemore, a new Goodlettsville Middle School, which is, I think, long been needed. Again, the full detail of the projects will be released when we file the initial bond resolution with the Metro Council later, either this week or next, probably next. There's legislation that accompany the capital improvement budget also. Finally, as I conclude, once again, as we're obligated to do, we've filed a balanced budget with the focus on the city's priorities. We're going to see a reduced property tax rate due to the appraisal. And I think, I feel very strongly about this, that this budget, as we've proposed, meets the needs of our city and will keep Nashville moving forward once again. With that, I appreciate all of your time and attention as always. And Council Vice Mayor, I assume we are now open for questions.
We have a few that wish to ask questions, and then Councilmember Matthews has some announcements. Councilmember Stein.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor and Mr. Chairman. In your department head meetings, you asked all departments to go through the exercise of a 2% reduction. Two parts. First, are there any departments that are being cut more than 2%? and you may not be able to answer that. Let me just ask it all to you. Then in the other part of that is prior to our starting our budget hearings, since obviously we're going to hear about it in great detail, it would be helpful for you to give us a list of all the departments that were cut, period, in your $11 million in reductions.
That's easily done.
That would be, I think, very helpful to us because we're clearly going to hear what those reductions are all about. And then just one comment, I would say obviously the devil is in the detail, and I would never prejudge any of this until we do our budget hearings. But I do think that the balance of increase for this year with the impact that our previous years have had on our general government seems to me to be in line with where we are as a community, because I think our general government has been taken to the nub in many places, and I'm glad we're not continuing to do that. Thank you.
Councilman, obviously we'll be more than happy to give you a list of all. I don't believe anybody received more than a 2% cut, and very few would be at a 2% level. And I share with you that your comment about some departments, needing to be some additional funds. Let me just say that this can't all be done at once. I mean, there's a lot of things you'd like to do immediately for departments, but it's just not practical and or financially affordable. But I think this is a start in this year's budget, and hopefully we're going to continue that process as long as we see this economy continuing to get better.
Councilmember Tigert.
Thank you for being here, Rich. And just piggybacking off of Councilman Stein's comment, that was the first thing I circled about the $11 million reduction in certain departments, needing to know when and where and how that was going to be done, and were these legitimate, maybe legitimate's not the right word, but actual cuts as opposed to hypothetical, maybe we can save that. Can you restate your position as it relates to farmers market, state fair, municipal auditorium?
Well, I think they're all different. I think, as I said to the auditorium, I believe it has enough fund balance that it will be able to finish this year within its revenues, potentially using some, if not all, of its fund balance that's remaining. I think as it relates to farmers market, I think what we've seen is a realization by the board that that the current process is not doable, that they have a lot of work to do in order to turn that around. I've seen them, rolling up their sleeves and working hard on that over the last several weeks. They have a plan which they will get into more detail. I don't have all the details in front of me, which I'm sure they'll be happy to. That would show how they plan on that becoming more sustainable over the next several years, and hopefully get to a break-even point within a 2 or 3 year period.
So we're sort of in the same mode we were last year, that they're not guaranteed a subsidy if they can't make it, but
well, I think that, yeah.
If they're making progress, then
I think that's fairly stated. I mean, I think that, if you give them $500,000, just rolling up a number, then they're going to spend to that number, right? So let's keep, they've demonstrated to me over the last several weeks a willingness to do what I would say the right thing and make some decisions to make it better. And let's see where they are over the course of the year. They're going to need a subsidy at some point during this fiscal year. I'm sure of that. And I think that once we're comfortable, the council's comfortable, that they have a plan in place, then I think we can address that at the appropriate time during the fiscal year.
without a comfortable plan is part of the discussion perhaps of eliminating these facilities?
I don't think we've come to that bridge at this point.
Thank you.
Councilmember Evans.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor, and Rich, thanks for the presentation. I think you just answered one of my questions. Eliminating the subsidy for farmers market, the auditorium, and the state fair isn't necessarily intended to say you're not getting a subsidy, but we need a plan.
I think that's fairly.
Is that okay?
That's well said.
Okay. What I was going to say is I'd be concerned about them limiting the use of these enterprises and therefore making their subsidy requirement on the back end worse, which is sort of what happened this year to a certain extent. So I want to try and avoid that if we can, and certainly through good planning we can do that. On the schools budget, which I know you have probably spent a great deal of time on, would it be possible, or would you consider asking if schools might consider a performance audit? We haven't had one since 2001. I know they're doing some great things. I know they're doing some things that could improve, and I think that would be a great additional information for us next year when we come back in what's likely to be a tougher, budget situation.
Yeah. Performance, obviously, ultimately, it's up in their hands if they want to do a performance audit on their functions. I think what they have said to me is that they are charging that Dr. Register is charging all of his leaders to identify ways in which they can lower cost and to decide which programs are a priority, which aren't priority, and because as we said, you can't. The budget increases we've seen in schools are going to be difficult to continue over the next several years. And so they're going to have to make some decisions, and I would like to think that they can make those decisions on their own.
Well, I guess I'm saying is I'd like to make sure they're getting all the help that they can get in making those decisions, whatever objective, information they need, because it has been quite a long time since we did one there, and I know we regularly do them 7 to 8 years, so just a thought. Thank you for your help.
Councilmember Westerholm.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor, and thank you, Rich. One of my questions have been touched on, at least, and we can go over there in more detail. I want to ask a quick question just about the compensation study, and just to get a general sense of how broad that is. And you also mentioned a study with the Sheriff's Office, and was wondering, is this across all departments? Does this include the schools as well?
The compensation study for Metro employees would not include schools. It would just be it'd be general government, police, fire, nature, health. The sheriff study was the sheriff came to us and said that he needed additional staffing. He felt it was important that he get an independent party to sort of verify that, so that the administration, the council, all had some data to make that decision on, and they've done that study, and I'm sure that'll become part of what will become available to the council as we go forward and as you deliberate over the budget.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gilmore.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Reading, for the presentation. I have two questions. One was about the farmers market and them not having a director. How does that impact their performance? You said holding them accountable, but they don't have a director, so basically you have the board.
I think that one of the things they're going to do, one of the recommendations that they're coming forward is they're going to hire a director.
Okay.
I think they're going to be looking to do that over the next several months.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I didn't hear that piece. And then the second piece is I wanted more clarity about the Office of Innovation, and more specifically what it does in relation to the Office of Neighborhoods. Are we eliminating the Office of Neighborhoods? Is it combining with that? If we could just have a little bit more clarity as it relates to that.
No, I think would be separate functions. There might be some relationship down the road as it goes forward. I think if you look around at some of the other cities, what they've done is they've seen this Office of Innovation is the idea of how to use technology better to provide services to the public, to get the public more access to the government. That's one area of it. I know in Ms. Lalonde's area, she's very interested in how social services are delivered to the public, and are we doing it the old way, or is there a more modern way to deliver those services? I mean, those are sort of broad areas that they'll be looking at. I don't have specific, workforce tasks for them. They'll be developing that, and that'll be a, sort of a work in progress over the course of the next year.
Councilmember.
One more follow-up. If they're doing, so what would the Office of Neighborhoods be doing? If you're saying they're giving interaction with the neighborhood, they're showing how we streamline stuff, how they can get in contact with different departments. That's what the Office of Neighborhood does now.
The Office of Neighborhoods is really designed to handle complaints and issues that immediately address specific neighborhoods. It's focused on those areas. I think the Innovate is looking sort of a step above that in terms of, long-term, how can we provide services better, more efficiently? How can the public access it? So a lot of it will be based on technology use and things of that nature going forward, which is, the things they might identify might then be able to be used by the Office of Neighborhood to be more effective and more efficient in communicating with the public.
Thank you.
We have approximately 15 more minutes in our time slot. Councilmember Bedney.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rivlin and Vice Mayor. I wanted to see, when you make your projection, your revenue projection, how are you mapping out the additional income from the opening of the convention center? And are you being conservative, are you being optimistic, and what is the range?
Well, I mean, I think we're being realistic. You never know until the year what's going to happen. I don't think we look into one project like the Music City Center to, inflate the revenues or anything like that for the next fiscal year. This year we projected a 6% growth in sales tax, and we're going to be at 8%, which is good. Whether 2 years ago we were at about 10% growth. Last year was 8%, or this year's about 8%, and so we think a 6% number is a realistic number looking forward to next year. So I mean, I think it's realistic, and obviously we hope it's low.
I'll be curious to know if you can give us a range, like pie in the sky and worst case scenario. I'd like to know what is the gap between based on worst case scenario in revenue income. And you don't have to answer that now. My additional question, and it's not related to this, is we just got in my district, the state has approved the widening of Nashville Road, and I wanted to know how that will work. Is that something that you are including in the capital improvement budget to work with them, or it will be an additional issue?
I'd have to ask Public Works. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry to be.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
All right, thank you, sir.
All politics is local. I understand
Yeah,
completely, Councilman.
appreciate it, sir.
Councilmember Matthews.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. First of all, I want to just thank Madam Vice Mayor again for appointing me to chair Budget and Finance this year and work and chair the budget process. I do want to mention that our budget hearings will start on May the 14th. We have a very aggressive schedule this year. It will be 2.5 weeks, and we will conclude on May the 31st with our work session. I want to encourage all council members to attend as many budget hearings as you possibly can, and definitely want to thank my committee for their work this entire year, and want to encourage them to attend all the budget hearings if you possibly can, but if you can't, just as many. But I look forward to working with all of you through this process and moving Nashville forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Rich, for coming over. I know you've probably given a lot of thought to this, but it just came to my mind when I looked at the different departments taking a 2% decrease. I was wondering why was not the school board asked to do the same thing, because the way the money is, I know you put a lot of time in this, but although they're working with kids, Public Works, for instance, really works for the public, and they do a great job. And to ask them to cut 2% and not the school board 2% seemed like it's not a real good balance, and you may have a reason for that. And I was just thinking, if they took a 2% cut, they still would be getting a 1.61 increase, which is not what they're asking for, but it's still something substantial. Can you explain that for me, please?
Well, let me say that while we asked departments for a 2% reduction, I think very few departments are actually getting a 2% reduction. Mm-hmm. So I don't have the percentages with me, but it's a little bit here, a little bit there, and it adds up over the course of it. As it relates to schools, I think, obviously that's a whole different issue that we could probably spend lots of time talking about if we chose to. But, schools also, like the rest of the government, has sort of some fixed costs that they have to meet. They have health issues, health benefit issues, they have pension issues, and things of that nature. And so, plus they have a growing school system. There's more kids in the system every year. They've been averaging about 1,500 kids a year in growth, and with that comes some additional cost. And so, again, we could spend all day debating the school budget, things of nature. We felt that the increase that we proposed was a responsible number, would allow them to meet their basic needs going forward, even though it wasn't what they had fully requested. So we were comfortable with that number, and we think it'll allow the schools to continue to provide, hopefully an ever better product for the students.
Councilmember Mitchell.
Yeah, I think you may have just answered, because that's what my question was going to be on the growth from 2009 to 2014. So that's 10,000 additional students that they now have in the system from your chart?
Exact numbers, but I think that's probably about right, yes, sir.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, we're hearing a lot of people questioning those numbers, but when you've got 10,000 more kids in the system, that's getting close to that 20% increase number. So, I mean, it makes sense. Plus, they're having additional cost that they're being forced upon them each year. This year they've got over $40 million in contracted charter schools that they can't cut a nickel from. So, you can take that off the books immediately, ladies and gentlemen, that they're forced, they've got to do that. And we've got people trying to get them to do more and more of those that they will never be able to cut a nickel from. And they've got 10,000 additional students that they've got to educate that we're going to have to cut from their schools. But the small portion of the children that are in those contracted schools, we're not going to be cutting a nickel from those schools, but from any child in one of the public schools, we're going to be cutting them. So let's keep that in mind in the coming weeks.
Councilmember Claiborne.
Thank you, Rich. Good presentation. One question on the compensation study. Will that include the council, or is that just for the non-elected employees of Metro?
I don't know the answer to that, Councilman. I don't know the answer. What happened to the council legislation, John? Do you know? I don't know where that status of that is. Was deferred to track with the budget. I would think that as the council wants that as part of it, it would clearly become part of it.
Well, the process that we just went through over the insurance benefit, there was a recommendation that a compensation study be done. So if this is going to be included in the budget, then it would make sense that that would take place at the same time that everybody else is being looked at.
I agree.
Councilmember Maynard.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, Chairman Matthews, and Mr. Reebling. I'm going to get all kind of emails like I normally do and phone calls about the hospital authority. And I think I have to say this, that the hospital authority has been working diligently to make, and I want you, Rich, to address that.
I agree 100%.
They have done everything they can to cut, be more efficient. Also, the hospital authority consists of 3 entities, Bordeaux, Knowles, and General Hospital. And so my question is, if you will look at the breakdown of what Bordeaux is and what its subsidy portion is, so that when we cut, that it does not mean that the cut is coming to General Hospital, but it's coming to the authority.
Correct.
And so if you would answer that, and my comment is this, is that I applaud the IOD program. I think that is one way of being innovative. I do know that we've had 2 studies done. I do know that Meharry is working with General. I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm happy where General and Meharry are now today. I think they're working better today than they've ever have to come up with innovative ways to put more patients in General Hospital, to be more efficient. So when we talk about a cut to the subsidy, before I get all these emails coming my way, it reflects, 1, that we have less employees, 118 less. 2, we are still going to get from DISH
The additional
subsidy coming in from the federal government.
Correct.
So I don't want 100,000 emails coming my way saying, why are you not fighting for General Hospital? It's not going to close. And my last point, and I hope that you'll address this, Rich, whatever we're going to do with Bordeaux, it will not affect the quality of health care for the existing patients. And we haven't even made any decisions. We're just looking at innovative ways to run the hospital authority. And I know said a whole
There's a lot
lot.
of questions in there, but I'll try to.
Well,
cover
you
it.
know, I
I'll
wouldn't
just
be me.
remind everyone we're scheduled to adjourn in 5 minutes, and I have 2 more people in the queue.
I appreciate you, Vice Mayor, and your patience. You are so wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Councilman Maynard.
Just quickly, a couple quick points on the hospital. The Hospital Authority has done an excellent job in looking at areas. We work together extremely close, and I couldn't be more pleased with the work they're doing in terms of trying to be as efficient as possible. You are correct. I think Meharry, General, the whole system is working better together than it's been in a while, and we're going to continue to look for ways to improve that. Bordeaux, clearly the patients there are a top priority. Proposals aren't even expected in until the end of May, so there's a lot of unknown in that area. And finally, I would say that as it relates to the subsidy, they're actually getting $3 million more this year in their subsidy than last year for their actual use, because last year we took $7.5 million away. So if you only take $4.5 million away this year, it's $3 million more for them for the operations of General, Bordeaux, and Knowles this year than they had last year.
And what is the subsidy for Bordeaux?
The Bordeaux is about $8 or $9 million.
Councilmember Holloman.
Thank you. I was just curious if you could tell us if the subsidy for the Predators, is that flat from last year as an increase? Do you know?
I think it's actually down a little bit in the budget.
Reduced.
$100,000, yeah.
I'm sorry, how much?
I think a few $100,000. I don't hold. I'll have to verify that, but I
Okay.
think the number's down a little bit this year because I think because of the whatever you call it, the lockout or the strike,
Oh,
whichever way it was.
We saved on our payments because we weren't required under the
I
contract.
think that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's down a little bit.
Okay.
Not substantively, but
Marginally down.
marginally down.
Okay.
I don't think Councilmember Langster is here. It must be Councilmember Dominy in her chair that wishes to ask the question.
Yes, ma'am, Vice Mayor. I actually moved here so I can see the
If he
chart.
can be as charming as Council Lady Langster.
Yeah, I want to sit next to my colleague here. I have a couple points. One, I would have to agree with you wholeheartedly that the fair, the municipal auditorium, and the farmers market are different animals, and we need to deal with them differently. But and I'll move on. We'll deal with that topic another time. But we mentioned a subsidy to the Arts Commission for a annual conference, and Councilman Holloman mentioned the subsidy to the Predators. All those I would assume would be done in order to have economic impact for the community. Are there any other subsidies for events such as CMA Festival, the Marathon in this budget, or possibly Music City bowl game?
I don't think so, Councilman. Most of those events are now, the Marathon, the Music City Bowl, the CMA Festival receive funding through the Event and Marketing Fund, the additional 50-cent fee that's on room bills. And so I don't, there's no direct money in here for any of those events.
So those would receive funding from the Event and Marketing Fund, and that comes from another source. Okay, I'll come back to you on a private time to discuss that. The other thing, you mentioned there's no step increases included in this budget, and I'm going to just ask, how would you respond to those employees that were hired under a specific plan, under agreement that this city hasn't honored over the last 3 or 4 years? I would see a way to hire people under a different agreement and not include those step increases long term, but right now we have employees that were promised step increases when they were hired and they're not included again this year. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think you have to look at the totality of the budget, and a budget reflects gives and takes in every regard. We've tried to be fair to all the employees. We've continued to fund. Last year was a significant pay increase. We continue to fund benefits, which continue to rise at high cost. And it's when you make a budget, there's things you can do and things you can't do. And we try to do the best we can for the city in totality, and that's how I would look at it. That's the only answer I can give.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Riebling, for being here.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
And I want to encourage everyone to attend as many of the budget hearings as you can. It's very important that you're there to ask your questions. There is no time limit, as you know, in our committee meetings, so come with your list as we interview the different departments and then have our work session, because the budget is now in our hands, and we need to do our due diligence with it. We are adjourned.
Hallelujah.
I didn't have